are there firms that we know of and associate as consumers that are actually complicit and actively co-opting with everything that's going on? Are there companies that we know of that are actually completely complicit in this, what's going on at the camps?
Yes, so there was a report done by ASPI, which is an Australian organization called the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and they had found that 83 global brands were either directly or indirectly involved. And how these brands work is that, for example, a company like Nike will go into China, but they will not actually deal directly with the factories. They will have a couple of middlemen. So the issue with that is all they do is they vet the middlemen, and then they don't go any further, and then they just trust those middlemen to take care of any of the logistics that are involved. But now there is a bill that is being reintroduced once more in the US called the Forced Labor Prevention Act, or the Forced Uyghur Labor Prevention Act, where, as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily profitable to just kill Uyghurs. The reason why the Uyghurs are dying is because they cannot take the torture. They're not actually being culled or being put into gas chambers because they are being forced to work as slaves. Their organs are being harvested, and even their hair is being cut and being sold. And so the US has also banned the buying of, you can get wigs that are with real hair. So anything from China is most likely that the hair has come from the concentration camps. So most global brands, so you name it, from your Apple to your Samsung to your Nike to your Adidas to your Fila to your H&M to G&M to all sorts of technology, like everyone's involved one way or another. And so, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any repercussions because actually by law, those companies owe it to their shareholders to make as much profits as they can, because if they start acting suddenly for human rights, which they should, they're technically breaking the law in their own country because they're not going out of their way to make the most profits as they can. So you're in this vicious circle where, okay, this company may want to do, I don't believe so, but perhaps may want to do good, but their own law doesn't allow them to do so. And so it's not just as simple as saying that these companies are complicit. I mean, there's not much you can do about that unless the government comes in and puts down firm laws to say you can't do business, and calling it a genocide is one step in that direction. Number two, we urge those companies to basically, you don't need to deal with China. I mean, if you're looking for, and I don't mean as this a disrespect to any people, but if you're looking for cheap labor, I mean, there are many other countries that you could go to that border China that could easily be done. And I'm sure, people have to pay a small price not to be involved in genocide. I mean, the world promised never again. And, hopefully it's not just talk, because that's what it's sounding like. Governments can only do so much, but as people, as human beings, especially in the West where we can vote, and I'm not going to get into an argument about whether voting is haram or halal, but talking to your MPs and writing to them, and if you're a student at a university and you find that your own university is somehow involved, for example, in the surveillance apparatus that's involved, or in the AI technology that they're working with China, you should call them out on that. Does your university have a Confucius Institute, which is an institute where it looks very nice and dandy, where it looks like they're teaching Chinese and they're teaching Chinese culture, but it's a way for China to spread their soft power in institutions where they normalize what's happening with China, that it's another answer besides the United States. And so they do this because as these students grow up, they're not going to see China as their enemy, because they've been sort of liking supporting China. Yeah.
So when you started, and you were giving us an outline history of all of this, uh, this did not come off as something that is actually recent. Unfortunately, the way that is played it out, the way it is being played out now as this is a recent thing. But what was the trigger why it has become such an international thing now? If this was a process that had been it's historic, but what was the trigger now?
Well, one, we have to be real about this. China was too early in the blocks to wanting to be the head of the world. The head or the boss of the world is the United States. And it wasn't until, China has always been known as a sleeping dragon, the number two, in the background doing its deals and making their money, and then now has become the second superpower in the world. But once China started threatening other world powers, that is when this news started to come about. Now, we'd like to think that, once the concentration camp started and therefore the world woke up. No, it's in my humble opinion, and unfortunately this is the case, that because China has started to threaten other superpowers, Uyghurs and other groups are being used. But that's not to say that a genocide is going on. And we thank anybody and any government and any person who is in support of the Uyghurs, regardless of whether their intentions are pure or not, because at the end of the day, this genocide is real. And so China built their relationship. So say post 2013 to 14, China was laying its seeds in the Middle East, making big deals with whether it be in gas and oil, with say your Arabian Gulf countries. And in 2013 to 14, you had the start of the One Belt, One Road project, which is this trade route, which would basically take over any sort of trade that you would need to do with the United States, and that would bring all the money and all the thing into Asia, and making essentially China the master of the world. So they were showing their cards way too soon, way too early. This is why, the eyes of the world are on China now, because they're just going for it now. And now they've realized that they hit the start button too early. And so right now you see a situation where, these Uyghur Muslims are being supported by the West, and you don't hear anything from Muslim countries because China had laid those foundations. They bought all those countries. They've essentially bought all of the Muslims, including Turkey, which are ethnically and religiously tied.
So, Arsalan, can I ask, is there a pecking order? I know this might sound a bit too trivial the way that I ask, and I apologize if it comes off like that, but is there a pecking order of countries that are expressing support to the people there, and also organizations that are also expressing support, for us to understand who are the players now that are making their stand clear on this?
So number one, the United States of America. Number two, the United Kingdom. Number three, Australia. Number four, Canada. And then the rest of the countries, say Europe and New Zealand and all these other Western countries, are after that. Again, you don't hear much. You hear the opposite from Muslim majority countries. And yeah, it's very confusing to see that happen, because if you're looking for Muslims, then the Uyghurs are Muslims, right? If you're looking for Turks, then the Uyghurs are also Turkic in nature. So we don't hear anything from the various Turkic nations around the world. And if you're looking for humans, then the Uyghurs are human beings. And basically that's the order of things. And the organizations, all human rights organizations, whether it be Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all of the main human rights organizations are supportive of this. And then we have our own Uyghur organizations, whether it be the Uyghur Revival Association, the Uyghur Human Rights Project, the World Uyghur Congress, the Uyghur American Association, various other organizations in the world that are basically raising this issue. And we have been raising this issue, but it hasn't come to light because the Uyghur situation hasn't fallen into the self and national interests of those countries that I just mentioned. And we're really worried that, for example, I read an article the other day where New Zealand was like, trying to give advice to Australia saying you should respect China. If you did, then you would have better trade relations. And so we're worried that this could be short-lived. And once China does start meeting those countries in the middle, then we could see that drop off as well. But hopefully, Yani, even if those countries were not standing up, and even no Muslim countries were standing up, we always have Allah by our side, and that's our only hope.
Correct. The thing is, so we at Strive, we're an advocacy organization. So, we not only hold events like this, we also write to our elected representatives, to our contacts in the press, and explain positions. And also try and implore how one can actually achieve justice in an equitable society. So, if you were to speak to each one of us individually, what is it that you would ask us to start with today?
Again, the first thing I would say is, it's very difficult because I would needed to know how you were, what your skills were, what sort of connections you had, and where you are with that. But just again, talking to your local leaders, whether they be ministers or MPs in Parliament. Again, if you in a university setting, I'd be talking with my professors. If you're studying something like political science or history, talk about writing a paper or a thesis on an issue that's happening in China or to the Uyghurs, whether it be One Belt, One Road, whether it be the various persecutions, the economics, Chinese communism, because the Chinese communism is not the same as communism itself. China actually doesn't like communism. They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. So, and talk about how this will eventually affect your own economy, your own society. And one thing has to be mentioned here is that, we've always said for many, many years when we weren't in the spotlight that watch one day this dhulm, this oppression will come to each and every doorstep. And what's been happening? COVID, subhanallah. Like everyone's locked up in their homes, and the UK, you guys are going through T1, T2, T3, T4, subhanallah, and now there's a new strain and blah blah blah. And subhanallah, look at how, for so many years these governments, these lands have been silent. And of course, staying at home with COVID, it's not the same level to what's happening in the concentration camps. But 100,000 people have died in the UK. Now, obviously, Allah gives and takes life. But the place, the regime, the ones that are responsible for this is China. In my eyes, in every single person who has ever been persecuted by China, those 100,000 lives in the UK were taken by China. And so people are blaming Boris Johnson, people are blaming Trump, people are blaming this and that. SubhanAllah, look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala evens things out.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room as you ended it on this. But what about in China? What is the sentiment of the population there? I mean, I understand the extensive control that has on the communications machine, but or a lot more correctly, the propaganda machine. But what about the general population there? What are their sentiments? How do they see this?
That's very hard to gauge, because all the Chinese people ever see is state-run media. So if you were to ask any Chinese person, what's happening with the camps, then they're not going to know how the camps are set up in their mind. And you would have heard this narrative in the West as well, that these camps are for people who have no jobs, It's to keep them busy. It's to give them training so that they are able to get jobs and that they are not involved in terrorism. This is the story. And this is a story that's given to the Chinese, so they believe that. And this is given to the story of many people in the West. A lot of people in the West believe that as well. Number two, the people that are going into these camps had already had amazing careers, who had worked for the government for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, who had retired or who are on the verge of being retired or who are about to retire. They had never committed a crime in their life. They knew Chinese law. They were wealthy. So that is a false narrative. Number two, you could never ever go into China and interview those people because one, they wouldn't give you a straight answer. And even if they did, their answer would be whatever the state-run media ever told you. And this is proof because any documentary that you see done from Al Jazeera to BBC, all the way from A to Z, any sort of media, CNN, whatever, even Eastern media that goes in, those media end up being followed half the time. And the documentary ends up being about, well, how, 1 or 2 days into our journey, we were followed by 20 black cars, and that's how the documentary ends. And you never ever see them talking to people on the street, because one, those people would not even approach you, and if when they did, those people, if they spoke the truth, they'd be disappeared, and you never hear them again. And even if you were to record someone, you, out of your own moral goodness, you wouldn't air that. Because the moment that film is aired, that person's gone. And we saw it with COVID, the people who first came out about COVID, all those doctors, where are they now? They're all gone. So take a lesson from that. So whenever China goes, Arsalan or whoever, you're all lying, well, prove us wrong. Let investigative reporters in. Now, the World Health Organization is there to check out whatever, but they're not being able to independently investigate. So China is hiding things. And if they are not afraid to let people in, what do you got to hide?
Arslan, and this may be completely away from the thread that we're talking about now, but I still want to understand a lot more about the history of the nation as we see it. We're trying to think of historical figures and presence and heroes present in the history or contemporary who've been there in the past and who are now sadly going through hell at the moment in these camps. Are there these names and faces that you can introduce to us and tell us about them?
Yes, so there are various people. For example, we have had Islamic scholars. We have had people that have translated various ahadith, Bukhari and Muslim and Al-Quran. They ended up in these camps and they died in these camps. We had poets. We have had actors. We have had singers. We have had footballers who are in these camps or have died in these camps. So we have various scholars, whether it be religious or sociocultural, economics. So for example, we have one popular economics professor by the name of Ilham Tohti, and his daughter currently in the US advocates for him. And he was a professor in Beijing, and he was trying to advocate so that Chinese and Uyghurs come together and live together harmoniously and that they understand each other, right? There's nothing illegal about that, but he went to jail simply for saying that. So, and we have various figures like this who, again, even though we have had imams and all the mosques that we have are state-run mosques, the ones that are still standing. Thousands of mosques have been destroyed, and you can look this up, but the ones that are still standing are all for show, right? And even those imams who go up onto the khutbah and give fake sermons, and I've attended many of those sermons, those khutbahs, even those imams are now disappeared. So you will even see not just the imams giving the Chinese propaganda to the people, but they go as far as, have you ever seen, right? Have you ever seen imams disco dancing in unison on a show, on a stage, in full imam gear? Ever, anywhere? No. But in China, you will, because they force them to do that. And this is the way to say, you know what, dancing like this or music like this, is allowed and permissible. It's like, they denigrate Islam. And so if you don't believe me, simply go to YouTube, typing dancing Uyghur imams. You'll find it straight away. It's not difficult to find. Number two, we have beer drinking competitions in Ramadan. You can have beer drinking competitions anytime, but specifically Uyghurs have to attend those competitions during the month of Ramadan, right? Food is suddenly given to the students. They're given water and free food during the month of Ramadan. So I know I sort of skewed away from the question.
No, please.
But besides those famous people, we've got a lot more other oppression that's going on, and simply a lot of those people teaching the Uyghur culture, teaching Uyghur poetry, teaching Uyghur songs, teaching Quran, doing any of these things that are different from Chinese or sort of the Chinese culture or Chinese communism is deemed separatist, extremist, and therefore you are labeled a terrorist.
Okay, so before I just open up for a question on voice, there is a question that will come to you. I just thought I'd slip in one question. You spoke about in very painful terms and in detail the torture and the attempt at what they refer to as assimilation. The threat. So we've seen what happens. The threat to your identity, to your the example of the language that you said when you were when people became illiterate, not once but twice because of the way this has been changed. For the benefit of everybody on the call, can you give us an example of the impact of those practices where you're trying to eliminate identity and culture?
Yeah, so if this continues to happen, there's a thing that is happening right now, which is if most of the people are in concentration camps, where are the kids going to go? And the kids are being put into boarding schools where they are indoctrinated to hate their own culture and to hate their own religion. Eventually, what will happen is, now what happened to, say, my mum's generation was she became illiterate overnight, but then, she sort of still found her own way, right? But what's happening now is we're going to have a generation of Uyghurs for the first time in Uyghur history where they will not identify themselves as Muslims. For the first time since Uyghurs accepted Islam. So that's a huge impact right there. Another one that's happening is the forceful marriages of Uyghurs to Han Chinese atheist men. And how this happens is that either one, these Uyghur women sign up to get married so that their family members don't end up and die in concentration camps. And number two, Uyghur women are seen as ghanima, as a bounty. So these hardworking communist soldiers are awarded or rewarded with a Uyghur woman to marry and then procreate. And so they will have children. So now I'm not against anyone, whether we talk about from a religious perspective or not. You can marry whoever the hell you want. That's your business between you and Allah. But forcing people to marry in an attempt to get rid of Islam and to get rid of the Uyghur culture in the region, this is something else.
So the activists here in the UK in particular, this is for us to start thinking of how we build up momentum and fulfill our role. The activists here, predictably the Chinese apparatus surveys them, but there is surveillance. Do they get into trouble? Are you aware of activists around the world facing problems when they speak about the plight of people going there?
Yeah. So, for example, I was lucky enough to interview a human rights lawyer who works at the UN called Emily Riley, and she's a whistleblower. And we have come to know through her that the United Nations gives names to the Chinese government who are about to speak in their meetings. So, and then therefore their family members. And if you guys want to check out that interview, go to Talk East Turkestan, type in Emily Riley, and you'll see that interview. And yeah, so the Uyghurs families are always threatened, simply, and this happens in many countries as well, where your family members are put into prison or tortured and things like this. But yeah, it happens with us as well. And the UK, as you mentioned, there are many activists there. You've got the World Uyghur Congress there. You got our representative there as well for Talk East Turkestan. And so, yeah, this constantly happens.
So which I just wanted to check, are there instances of people who have been able to save themselves and to have escaped? We're not asking you to reveal who they are, but who have escaped to these to other countries? Has it been possible? I mean, and
yes. So we have had some Kazakhs who were in the camps escape to neighboring Kazakhstan, and certain NGOs got involved and put pressure on Kazakhstan, and eventually some are still stuck in Kazakhstan, and some of them got into Europe. Some were lucky enough. So, for example, there is a former concentration camp detainee by the name of Zumrat Dawood. She has a Pakistani husband, and her story, like we've interviewed her a few times. Long story short, her husband got in touch with the Pakistani embassy in Beijing. He put pressure on that way, saying that he will go to the media if they don't release his wife. And then she eventually and her whole family made their way to the United States. So if you're like a dual citizen, or you escape by foot to a neighboring country, if you're lucky, I mean, those are the ones that we have heard of, but God knows how many thousands, if not tens of thousands, that were sold, yeah. So so there are a few cases where people have been able to escape, but again, there's about 10 people who have actually gotten out and spoken about it. Like,
are there any organizations here in the UK that we can get in touch with, that we can work together, and help them to try and get lawmakers and policymakers get the issue, and also think of concrete steps, not only just speaking to governments, but also even the corporations that you listed are being complicit in this?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with the World Uyghur Congress. They have a branch in the UK, in London. You can speak with IPAC, Interparliamentary Allegiance or Alliance Against China, with a Lou de Pulford. I interviewed him as well. And he's working with the shadow ministers. So the IPAC is an organization, is pretty much UN 2.0, where they work with the shadow ministers of all these Western countries to, it's basically the UN, an unofficial UN. Benedict Rogers, he has an organization, and you can find him on Twitter, and he's the head of Hong Kong Free Watch, but also into the Uyghur situation and highlights that plight as well. So you have a few out there, and you have a few MPs. Simply type in, I forget the names, but if you simply type in Uyghur genocide or Uyghur plight, UN or UK Parliament, you'll find those MPs that are constantly bringing up this situation.
Okay. The way that we've seen this thing evolve, I know that we mentioned in the very beginning that it was the countries that are there out in the West that have now spoken about it and used the most appropriate descriptor of what it is and called it what it is. I'm trying to think about also a bit of context also, because the global war on terror was something that actually victimized quite a lot of people who were actually oppressed and were victims of not only the movement but also the act. Was this a journey that the Uyghurs also had to go through at the beginning? Were they first vilified and demonized? And I'm not speaking about China, I'm speaking about other nations, liberal democracies and all of that.
Yeah, so there's a very good book. I forget the man's name, but I also had a chance to interview him, Dr. Robert. There's Dr. Robert Spalding. He's a former general. He was actually an advisor to President Trump. He has a very good book on this issue. And another doctor, professor, who wrote specifically about how the global war on terror affected China and their stance against the Uyghurs, where, George Bush's famous quote, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." Well, China said, well, we've got a bunch of terror. When, those were the days, I'm sure, you and I are both old enough where we realized that, especially 2001, the first decade of the 21st century was like, the word terrorism was synonymous with Islam and Muslims. That sort of died down now, where it's sort of cool to be Muslim, and you got, especially in the UK, you've got this trend. But in those times, they're like, well, we got Muslims or we got terrorists in our border, and this is the way that we're going to deal with it. And in that time, certain groups were labeled as terrorists by the United States. That's it. Thank you so much, Sean R. Roberts. The war on Uyghurs. I got to interview that man, and we talk specifically about this issue. And so they use that, especially in the first half of the first 10 years, the first decade of the 21st century, to crack down on Uyghurs. And that's where you really saw up front, in your face, women in hijab, burqa, men in like with the beard being arrested, praying, all of these things. People were being arrested before that, but this time it was really in your face because you had the support of the West. The West was not going to speak up against any sort of persecution against Muslims. But now things have changed, where it's in everyone's self-interest, especially the West, to be speaking on any sort of persecuted group within who are under the Chinese regime.
So we spoke about solidarity. We spoke about aligning and working with other persecuted groups, or using the same approach that they have towards policymakers. I'm trying to find out, what about? I mean, I know you spoke about Chinese society, but what about other Muslim ethnic groups in China? I mean, are they given us? Are they treated with kids' gloves by the state, or do they have more rights? Is it easier for them, or are they also threatened in the same way that
Yes. So for the longest time, no. Up until 2018, a lot of these other Muslim groups, for example, the biggest group in China of Muslims are the Hui Muslims. They have been pretty much fine. And when you go to these areas, it's pretty much like Saudi Arabia, where you have madrasa and you have adhan, because they are essentially Chinese. They will argue that they are mixed with something else, but they are Chinese Muslims. They have been okay for the most part, but in the last 2 years, they too have been persecuted, not to the extent of the Uyghurs, but their mosques have also been destroyed, and their imams have been also persecuted as well. But that goes to say, China is not just against Islam, they are against any form of religion. So whether it be Islam, Christianity, Judaism, now all those sorts of, even Hinduism, all those sorts of religions are technically legal to be practiced, but it has to be done under the state with strict, it's very strict, it's strictly monitored. However, in East Turkestan, you can't practice at all. In other parts of China, you can still practice to an extent, but in East Turkestan, no practice of anything. And all these new age religions that have come up in the last 100 or so years, they're totally illegal. So like new age forms of Buddhism, or this like Scientology and all these kinds of new age sort of religions, like all these that's totally illegal. So China is against all religion, totally against Islam in East Turkestan, like nothing, not even salam. But in the rest of China, you can still see it, but very strictly controlled. But no one has been persecuted or is persecuted like the Uyghurs to date. And I would argue in the world. And the only sort of group that you could sort of compare it to is Rohingya, Yemen. But even with those places, at least you get the body back, you know, at least it's being recognized, at least you see footage. But with us, it's like, it's very difficult to find evidence. And the only sort of evidence that you can find is off websites where they clearly state, you know, the birth rate of the Uyghurs, you know, you're not allowed to give birth anymore. The birth rate of the Uyghurs is close to zero. And the Chinese government will say this out loud. And the other evidence is the simple fact that the Uyghurs on the outside cannot communicate with anyone on the inside. You can't call them, because calling them and interacting with the outside world in itself is illegal. So I know many people who haven't spoken to their mum in years, their father in years, their brothers, sisters in years.
So tell us, I know we've spoken about this in detail, but you know, I've been getting questions about this, but tell us a little about the journey in these camps. Are these permanent structures? What goes on in them? I mean, I know that we've had several accounts, but the accounts that you have heard, can you share that with us?
Yeah, so initially, the Uyghurs are not necessarily taken away. They're literally called to the police station. And because of the fear that's just going on anyway, as soon as you get a call, and I've talked about the situation on the ground, you get a call from the police officers, you're going to go straight away. There's no one's going to come and bother with grabbing you. You're going to go. That's how much control they have over the people. Once you do go there, you go through a medical check. Your blood, your urine, your speech, your eye, your retina, your face, all those expressions are taken and recorded. Next, on a daily, mostly I've spoken to the women in these camps. Their blood was taken on a daily basis, and something was injected in them on a daily basis, which took away, they stopped having periods. And these women were on 400 to 500 calorie diets. They're given some sort of steamed bun. And even in the bun, there was like rubbish inside the bun. And they were given some sort of soupy substance, but they would remain full because apparently ever since they were getting those injections, they never felt hungry. They never felt cold. They didn't have a reason to, they were like zombies. They didn't care about anything. So whatever they were being injected with, it got them to like a zombie-like state. They didn't have to go on much. They would go through sort of tawbah sessions, repentance sessions. And who they would repent to is they would write letters to Xi Jinping, which is the General Secretary of China. They would write repentance letters, repenting to him because they had previously repented to Allah. Can you imagine that? You're making tawbah to a human being because you are praying, you are worshipping Allah. So they had to do this. And you know how, it would be easy just to, you know how even if someone makes you say a statement of kufr, but as long as in your heart you are a believer, then that's fine, you're still a Muslim. But in these sort of indoctrination lessons, in these classrooms, everyone is made to they're made to sit on cement flooring. It's not like on the news where everyone's on a table and chair and they're singing, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. It's not one of those. The teacher is in a sort of barred, they're in a cube where they're protected, and they are indoctrinated. There is no Allah, there is no God. You get your bread from the government takes care of you. And on the way out, they ask you questions, right? Is there Allah? And normally in that situation, you say, no, there is no Allah, right? But some people would hesitate for half a second. And because of that hesitation, you get beaten. So that's how they know you have religiosity in your heart. And someone's asked, how do you know about this inside story? Because former concentration camp detainees have told me their interviews are on our channel, Talk East Turkestan. That's what they've been telling me. And that's what they've been telling the mass media, that this is what happens.
So what's been the feedback that you've had so far in the activism that you do, which is reaching out to policymakers? What if there was a lack of support, why? And if there was enthusiasm to, and when I say enthusiasm, I mean they agree and they are willing to take the message for. What has been the reasons, either both not showing interest and for showing interest? This is for us to understand how the apparatus works.
Everyone shows interest, whether you are left, whether you are right, whether you are anti-Muslim, whether you are a Zionist, whether you are a Trump supporter, whether you are a Biden, it doesn't matter. I've spoken to proper people who hate Islam, and they said, what's happening to you guys is so bad, and I fully support you guys. The Uyghur plight is the only situation in the world right now where extreme left, extreme right, whether you're in the center, whether you are religious or atheist, have come together. It is the only situation in UK politics, in American politics, in Australian politics, where everyone's coming together. Like no one, and this is not like, you know how we Muslims, we advocate for various different groups and various different things against Islamophobia, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure a lot of organizations, maybe like yourself, have, spoken against Islamophobia. You're going to get mixed, but no, with Uyghur issue, you're only getting support, and they'll go, hey, you're missing this point, and they'll support you. Right? So you're not going to get flagged by your government. Nothing's going to happen to you. You'll be supported. And this is a patriotic act for each individual out there. So it's only those ones who are actually getting paid by the government, or the media that they work for is being paid by China, that you'll get backlash. And we call those people Wumao, or the Chinese 50-cent army. You will get backlash from them, but other than that, you won't get backlash from anyone. Yeah.
So if that's the case, then shouldn't this sounds like a recipe for a solution? If you've got the whole world, irrespective of their ideological spectrum, outrage and being in complete agreement, is it still because sovereign states are refusing to take the stand? It is still individual citizens who are doing this?
Well, one, everyone will agree with you that what's happening is a genocide and they want to support, but because there is no pressure to do anything from the people, right? And in a lot of these countries that support you, there is still this sort of thing in the background. Well, how can we profit from this? How can we can make an extra 5% or 10% on trade deals if we put the Uyghur situation to you know what I mean? So number two, it's China, right? Now, what did I say? Who was the country that was calling it a genocide? The United States, right? So what's going to happen is China is going to stop making trade deals with the United States. But if now Europe and the UK and Australia and other countries start to do trade deals, those countries are going to get rich, and they're going to be powerful. You're going to leave the United States by themselves, right? So that's the situation now. So China is playing these countries. There's the background in this are trade deals. People have to put that away. And if everyone says it's a genocide, you're a killer, this is when we'll see action. And so this is where we're at, because again, China is not like Burma or Zimbabwe or South Africa. It's not one of these little poor countries that you don't need to deal with. People need to deal with China, but they have to give up quite a lot in doing so. And Are countries willing to do so? I mean, God knows. America is willing to do so, but how long can they last doing so by themselves? Allah knows.
So, in terms of tactic, then, is it highlighting the plight, or is it independence? Because you are a separate cultural entity.
Both. Like, for example, if China from day one were doing what they say they were doing, which is we're going to live harmoniously with all cultures, there would be no need for independence. But people have come to the realization that without independence, we're going to be slaughtered. So the two go hand in hand.
Fine. So, which means the long game here is actually removing any cultural remnant of your history, of your shared heritage, so that the cause for independence is taken away, and then it just becomes, this is our internal problem. Please don't bother about it.
Exactly. Because what's going to happen is in 20 years, you're going to have, as I mentioned, Uyghurs are going to be speaking Chinese, looking Chinese. The reason why they're getting rid of all the mosque is because, the propaganda they're painting is that, Islam is this evil Arab system that was introduced to the Uyghurs, and it was forced upon the Uyghurs, and Uyghurs and Islam have nothing to do with each other. And the gentleman before said, I don't look like a Uyghur. This is how Uyghurs, I mean, some Uyghurs are Asian looking, Caucasian looking. A lot of Uyghurs do look like me. Kazakhs are a little more Asian looking. But you'll see, if you were to go to the region, you'll see many people that look like me, people that look like Habib. So, yeah.
Arslan, this will be our last question for today. I mean, we've had you for quite some time, and I cannot thank you enough for this. But exactly. What I want us to remember is the story. If I could please ask you the most difficult story that you have heard from the several people that you have spoken to and have opened their hearts, so that our eyes are open to what is actually going on there. Because we as Muslims and conscientious citizens of our world will do our duty in actually not just spreading the word, but also making concrete action to say that this is not ever happening again. Please share that story.
Yes,
this will be my last question.
A very sad story was of a father in Turkey who I met, and he had not spoken to his child. He left because what happens is a lot of the Uyghurs that were able to leave, you can't leave as a family. It's very difficult to leave as a family. So one family member, either the father or the mother, will leave and then slowly bring over the rest of the family. But what happened was when he left, the borders closed, and his child was about not even a year old. And he hadn't seen his child for a good 3-4 years. Then he opens up the Chinese, because, TikTok is that's the international version of TikTok. The Chinese version that's allowed in China is called Douyin. So him scrolling through Douyin, he sees his kid in a boarding school learning and speaking Chinese, the communism that was taught to him, and is shouting and screaming in his foreign language, and he sees this. And so can you imagine your child you don't see for 3 or 4 years is forced upon another religion? Because, deen is not just religion, it's a way of life. So communism or whatever it is, you see your kid stripped away from you into a boarding school, being fed whatever is given, because we have heard stories where, they're fed pork and they're fed all these ideas about how Islam is evil, and you see your kid and, and he's been stolen and you can't do anything about it, and he's in the palm of your hand. And you might as well think, Giannis, take the kid's life, that would be much better. But what is that father going through on a daily basis? And there are millions of children in this situation. And there are people that haven't, and that's the very cruel and sad bit where, you know, if they had just died, right? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You know, you make dua, you do qiyaba, namaz or whatever, and it's done. But they're still alive. They're going through that. They're going through the torture. They're going through indoctrination. And even if they were to have died, you would never, ever know. Because they don't announce, they don't give you a phone, hey, guess what? You know, first of all, you don't know which concentration camp your family member is in. And number two, if they had died, you wouldn't even know. Maybe they had died a year ago. And we have heard so many stories where they find out their mother or father died like a year or 18 months later. So that's the thing of like not knowing.
Thank you, Arsalan. That was very painful for us to know, but I think it was important that we remember the story of the brethren, that we extend our support. As a start, we pray for you and for the people there, and as an organization, we will do everything that is at our disposal to speak to people in organizations that we know, be it political or even in the press, to try and highlight them. And I'm very grateful for you to having spent your time with us to open our eyes, and to everybody who's also joined the call, and to those who have submitted your questions. I apologize for not being able to accommodate all of them, but Jazakallah khair, and thank you so very much, Arsalan. And Ameen, we get the opportunity to speak again, and Ameen, Ameen Ya Rab, in happier situations.
Ameen Ismail. Just Jazakallah khair again for organizing this, and everyone that has seen this video. Make sure you guys share it. Talk, you know, like talk to your friends and family, and you don't know where that conversation will lead, because your friend may have another friend in parliament and they could do something. They could write a paper, a complaint, start a petition. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say.